Environmental educators will benefit from having knowledge of the concept of governance, as it fundamentally shapes the form and function of our urban and rural environments. So if we think back to our social studies, we define governing as conducting policy, affairs, and actions of the government or public sector. This includes elected officials, the president, congressmen, mayors, as well as appointed officials like the Secretary of Agriculture or local Parks Commission, and bureaucrats. All of these different individuals and agencies, as well as the legislation they create and policies they implement, are all a part of governing our environment. Government is multi-level. In the U.S., many of the landmark regulations supporting environmental quality, such as the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, were passed starting in the 1970s at the federal level. Yet scholars have argued that the last few decades have seen a decline in the dominance of the nation as the primary arena of environmental policymaking, and have seen the rise of cities and regions, such as through local sustainability policymaking, as well as the rise of multinational and global efforts, like EU protections of rural agricultural practices. These are examples of the upscaling and downscaling of different policymaking arenas. Also, we know that government doesn't work alone. We can define governance as the conduct of public affairs through public, civic, and private sectors. The private sector is for-profit, comprised of corporations, firms, and businesses. The civic sector is sometimes called the third sector, as it's neither government nor business. It's also known as the nonprofit or voluntary sector and includes non-governmental organizations and community-based groups. Scholars have pointed to a late 20th century broadening of players involved in governance. Some critical scholars attribute this to the rise in neoliberalism, with cutbacks to federal and state programs, an emphasis on austerity and fiscal discipline, and use of private sector partners to fill gaps in state spending. On the other hand, some scholars emphasize that civil society groups can help increase citizen participation in governance and provide new avenues for meaningful engagement. In the case of parks and green space, historians have shown that non-state actors have a long tradition of being involved in the creation, financing, and operation of these resources. So this expansion of actors is not necessarily a new phenomenon. The key question is how to make that involvement democratic, transparent, and equitable. Remember that governance can occur in the form of collaborative agreements and alliances, as well as through contestation. Examples include protest, advocating for particular bills or laws, lobbying, critiquing through media, and litigation through courts. The process of governance is far from conflict-free. So what does the notion of networked governance add to this account? Networks are defined by Rhodes as a form of governing structure that can be contrasted with others like hierarchy or markets. The difference between these structures are clearest when we think of the ideal or simplified form. So for hierarchy, picture a pyramidal organization chart with a single decision maker at the top and several clearly defined rungs of employees, each accountable via a chain of command. Military organizations are one classic example of hierarchy. For markets, picture an open arena of buyers and sellers able to have individual transactions with each other based upon supply, demand, and price. Picture a live auction floor as this sort of open competitive arena. Networks are the spider web-like connections where information can flow laterally as well as vertically. Picture a social network of friends and acquaintances, or even a physical infrastructure network like roads or telecommunication systems. Attention to networks reminds us to look beyond the formalized organizational chart. We know how authority is institutionalized within the structures of government. But what are the other points of intersection where the civic and private sector have influence on the public sector? How do information, funding, physical materials, and even personnel flow across sectors and scales? Yet, none of these ideal forms exists without the elements of the other. Networks, hierarchy, and markets work together, and networks are suffused with power dynamics. All the actors within a network are not equivalent. Some have a larger number of ties or are more central. Others are located at key junctures within the network, and so they occupy important positions. One tool that can help us to visualize and understand these relationships is social network analysis. This is a methodology that originated in quantitative graph theory but has progressed to a wide array of applications. It maps the relationships or ties between nodes, often individuals or organizations. Let's look at an example to make this more concrete. Working with Erica Svensson of the U.S. Forest Service and Dana Fisher of the University of Maryland, we developed the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project, or STEWMAP. We define stewardship as conserving, managing, monitoring, educating about, or advocating for the local environment. We built a database of about 2,500 civic stewardship groups and surveyed them about who they are, what they do, where they physically work, and who they are connected to. This is a picture of the overall network of stewardship groups across all three sectors in New York City. Overall, we found a broad, polycentric stewardship network that is part of the governance structure of New York's urban environment. Working with James Connolly of Northeastern University, we found that approximately a dozen civic groups are playing a crucial role in sharing information and resources in New York City. They cross sectors and scales by serving this brokering role between smaller civic actors and larger public agencies. These groups are building multi-scaled governance capacity and helping build a more flexible, adaptive institutional structure. We can also look at how networks differ by issue area. I visualized the social networks of urban forestry and urban agriculture in New York City during 2007 to 2011, the first 4 years of the city's sustainability plan. At the time, urban forestry was prominent in the city's sustainability plan, but urban agriculture was not even mentioned. So the networks show the public sector in blue, civil society in yellow, and the private sector in red, and the size of the square node reflects the number of ties each organization has. The urban forestry network is rather centralized and state-led, with major public agencies like the City Parks Department in the center, but working along with the nonprofit New York Restoration Project, along with a handful of other key citywide civic greening groups. In comparison, urban agriculture presents a polycentric, sprawling, primarily civic-led network. It includes everything from community garden groups to greening nonprofits, along with small businesses, such as restaurants selling locally raised produce. This squares with our understanding of urban ag as a broad-based social movement in New York City. I believe that these visualizations work best when they're used in tandem with qualitative methods, so interviews, archival research, document analysis, and case study. One provides a visual overview of the structure of the network, and the other provides content of how that network evolved and operates. So the goal of this brief lecture was for you to be able to define governance and how it relates to government, to understand governance as multi-sector and multi-scalar, to consider power dynamics involved in governance, and to know the difference between networks, hierarchies, and markets, and to begin to think about different ways of visualizing and analyzing governance networks.